Protection and Assistance in the context of migrant smuggling. We will be looking at a range of protections that are available to refugees and migrants who have been smuggled. So to begin with, what does protection and assistance mean in the context of migrant smuggling? Well, protection is about safeguarding people from harm. As law enforcement, you may come across you may be the first to come across migrants who need assistance. For example, if you intercept migrants in distress at sea, or if you discover a truck in which migrants are hiding inside, or in case you come across migrants who are stranded in transit zones. In all these contexts, assistance means providing for their needs and for their safety. Humanity has been on the move since the earliest time. People move in search of better life and better economic opportunities. People move to escape persecution, poverty, or to escape from situations of natural disasters, or in response of the adverse effects of climate change. Well, all the people on the move are entitled to human rights. They are entitled to the equal protections of their rights under international human rights law. In this brief video from UNODC, you can explore further human rights in the context of smuggling of migrants. Here we will focus on the protections which are available within the smuggling of migrants protocol. So to begin with, the protocol does not intend to criminalize migration, neither migrants nor refugees. Article 5 of the protocol prohibits explicitly the prosecution of smuggled migrants as accomplices in their own smuggling. However, the protocol does not preclude that migrants may be liable for other offenses. What are the protection obligations for migrants who are smuggled? Well, first of all, under Article 16, states are required to take appropriate measures to protect the rights of persons who have been smuggled. This includes the right to life, the right to not to be subjected to torture or to other inhuman or degrading treatment. States are also required to afford migrants appropriate protection against violence. They also are required to provide adequate assistance to those whose lives or safety were endangered. This, for example, would mean providing urgent medical care or accommodation, etc. States are also required. You're also required to inform migrants about the possibility to contact their consular services. Well, in situations in which you as law enforcement have operational knowledge that some migrant smuggled may be in danger, then you have to take active steps to prevent such dangers or violence against migrants who are being smuggled, and also to provide them with necessary urgent assistance. Let's look at the specific needs of some particular groups. So some people on the move have specific rights and also specific protection needs. For example, this may depend on their age or on their gender, or it may depend on their health status or on the circumstances in which they've been compelled to migrate and to move. So with particular reference to children, I think children may be traveling with their families, but there is also a significant number of children who may be traveling unaccompanied or separated from their families, or in some cases they may be even traveling together with distant relatives, with friends, or even with smugglers themselves, who are paid a fee in exchange for caring and protecting these children. As a law enforcement official, it is important that you are aware of the specific risks that these groups may face and also of their specific protection needs. For example, in the case of children, they require immediate and ongoing medical assistance and safety, and for children the principle of urgency applies. Or if we consider women, along many irregular migration corridors, women and girls are subject to gender-based violence. There are also cases that involve boys and men, but they are less reported. Other groups that require specific protection needs and specific protection measures are refugees or victims of crime, and also persons who are intercepted at sea. So let's look at these groups more specifically. What are the specific protection needs of asylum seekers and refugees? Well, a cardinal principle for the protection of refugees is non-refoulement. Non-refoulement is a rule of customary international law. It means that a person, even if she or he was smuggled, cannot be returned to a territory where their life and freedoms would be threatened, or where they would be at risk of being subjected to torture or cruel or other inhuman and degrading treatment. Another cardinal principle in the protection of refugees is non-discrimination. So this is an overarching principle that applies to all migrants and refugees. So for example, refugees should not be discriminated in their access to safety and to territory because they've been smuggled. Another specific protection measures for refugees is the non-penalization for irregular entry, which is established under Article 31 of the Refugee Convention. This means that they are entitled to legal protection regarding their irregular entry in recognition of the fact that they may have had no choice but resort to smugglers because their lives were at risk or because they faced a great danger, so they had no other alternative. Protecting refugees and requires referring them to the appropriate asylum channel, so referring them to UNHCR or to other competent asylum authority. Let's move now to the protection obligations towards smuggled persons who are intercepted at sea. So to start with, it's important to clarify that these protection obligations are established both under the Migrant Smuggling Protocol but also under international law of the sea, and in particular under the SAR conventions. So states are obliged to take measures to relieve imminent dangers to the lives of these persons at sea. They're also to ensure that their safety and also that they are treated in a humane way while on board of vessels. Furthermore, under international law of the sea, it's very clear that any person in distress at sea needs to be assisted, regardless of their nationality, regardless of their status, so without any kind of discrimination. Those individuals who are rescued at sea must be immediately or must be disembarked to a place of safety as soon as it is reasonably practicable. It is also important to respond to their immediate medical needs or to their immediate other needs. Further, the duty of rescue at sea, as established under international law of the sea, implies and also that states have to ensure that those actors who effect rescue at sea are not held liable for migrant smuggling because they acted for humanitarian reasons. They did not act for the purpose of acquiring a material or financial benefit. Now let's move on looking at the obligations to protect smuggled persons who are victims or witnesses of crime. We have seen earlier on that smuggling of migrants can be abusive and even deadly. During their journey, migrants and refugees may become victims of a myriad of abuses and violence. For example, extortion for ransom, forced confinement, sexual violence, forced labor, and many other abuses. So very often smuggled migrants are victims of crime and witnesses of crime. They are entitled to protection and assistance as victims and witnesses, and particularly in cases of threat or intimidation by smugglers. They are also entitled to access procedures for obtaining compensation for damage suffered. They're entitled to participate in legal proceedings that concern them. And so their views need to be considered in criminal as victims of crime, and very often also as witnesses to this crime are to be safeguarded. In addition, especially those smuggled migrants who are victims of crime and who are collaborating with justice as witnesses, they're entitled to effective protection from the potential retaliation or intimidation. This, for example, could mean that they should be provided with, they may need physical protection, or they may need relocations, or it means that there may be limitations on disclosure of information regarding their whereabouts or their identity, or they may be entitled to other types of protections during the criminal proceedings. These protections are established not only under the Smuggling of Migrants Protocol, but also under Article 24 and 25 of the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, to which Pakistan is a party. So, in all these situations, let's try to recap what is the role of law enforcement as first responders. So, to begin with, where law enforcement identifies a particularly dangerous route or has intelligence about a situation that could be threatening the life or safety of migrants who are being smuggled, then it's a duty of law enforcement to take active steps to prevent such dangers or such violence, such harm from being done to these migrants. And also, it is a duty to take active measures to assist those who are whose life is endangered. In such cases, it will be important also for law enforcement to carry out systematically and ongoing risk assessments, and also to screen among migrants and refugees to identify those in need of protection and those that have specific protection needs. You may be some signs of violence may be immediately visible, but others, like signs of trauma, may not be immediately apparent. So, for example, it may, in case of victims of trafficking, this is not necessarily who may. So, in case of smuggled migrants who may also be victims of trafficking, this may be not immediately visible. You should be also aware that if you come across a migrant who has been victimized, that person may have a very immediate and urgent medical need, may be in need of psychological attention, may have very basic needs such as water, food, clothes, shelter, etc. Further, as it's advisable that you are aware of what are the possibilities of referring these persons with specific protection needs to the appropriate channel of protection. So it's important to have the information and to know which organization you may contact to refer refugees who have been smuggled, or victims of trafficking who have been smuggled, or victims of torture who have been smuggled, so that it's possible to take care of their specific assistance need. Generally, I think this will require that you are aware of the actors with whom you may cooperate. This could include, for example, international organizations such as IOM and UNHCR, but also NGOs that provide assistance and support to migrants who have been smuggled or who are in a vulnerable situation. In case of migrants who are victims or witnesses of crime, it's important to make referrals for them to be provided with immediate assistance that they need, and also to wait for the person to be stabilized before interviewing the person or before documenting further the alleged abuse. Also remember that in case you're dealing with a vulnerable witness who is a victim also of trauma, you may wish to involve in also a colleague who is experienced in interviewing traumatized witnesses. You may wish you will need to assess the risks to their safety on an ongoing basis. The risk they may be particularly high because these persons are collaborating with you in the investigation. And now, and also, of course, always it is an obligation of the receiving state to inform the smuggled persons about their possibility to contact their consular authorities. Finally, let's recap which are the key points. Number one, smuggled migrants shall not be prosecuted for agreeing to being smuggled. Number two, refugees should not be penalized for their irregular entry. And three, remember that migrants and refugees may be key informants or witnesses in the investigation of their smuggling. Thank you very much for your attention.